Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's lecture on indie games and how indie games differ from AAA games and AA games, and how they are able to find success and what these success stories look like, what games have done well and why they've done well. So I have a couple of examples here. There are a lot more than the ones that I'm going to discuss today, but um, these are the ones that really stand out to me and ones that I've played recently that have been very influential for me. So our first question is, what is an indie game and how does it differ from a, you know, triple A or a mainstream game title? Um, Indie games tend to be defined by having smaller teams, lower budgets, and being partially or fully independent from larger studios. A lot of times, indie games can be backed financially by publishers, but more often than not, even though I guess this may have changed a little bit with certain indie titles over the past couple of years, more often than not, indie games are not created by studios within a larger AAA studio. Um, because these are smaller games, because these are smaller projects, and the teams that build them sometimes as few as one person to maybe a dozen or so employees or a dozen or so developers. Um, these games tend to be more passion projects and more um, artistically driven, and the creators tend to have a much closer relationship with their player base, and they have more of a direct communication with their player base. Um, a lot of times, budget constraints and things require the studios to really think outside of the box for their game development, and you get a lot of innovation from that. This is different from AAA games where a lot of AAA games are really beholden to their shareholders and to the corporate aspect of game development. And because of that, and because of the amount of money that's being put into these large games, um, AAA games tend to be kind of risk averse. They're not looking to innovate and um, create unique, crazy gameplay or art styles or anything. They're trying to create a game that they know will appeal to enough people to be able to make uh, the amount of money that they want to make on their investment. Not to say that they're soulless. That it's just that when you get large amounts of money and large corporations involved, the bottom line becomes more about making the money versus creating a game that you want to see. Um, there are some pros and cons to doing indie development versus larger AAA development. I've mentioned before, indie developers tend to have a lot more freedom in what they can do. They do a lot more risk taking and more freedom in their artistic style and their content and their stories and things. But they have a lot less money, and because of that, the teams are smaller. And because of that, likely team members tend to have more than one job, and there's tends to be a lot more work per person in the studio. So, I mean, I've worked in an indie studio, Dogwood, for 8 years now, and I've done pretty much everything uh, in the games industry, from QA to direction to production stuff. Um, Graphic design, 3D modeling, 2D modeling, animation, audio design, level design, everything. I've done all sorts of jobs, and for very few projects. And these are things I've done on multiple different things on one project. And you can see that a lot, especially if the game has, say, one or two developers. Um, they tend to be something that's wholly those developers' work. Whereas with AAA games, because you have much larger teams, different studios within the umbrella studio doing specific parts of a project and things like that, the distribution of labor is a lot more even. And you tend to focus on like one single aspect of the game design as one employee working on the project. Um, Additionally, AAA games can look far more high fidelity, high quality when it comes to realism or to um, cinematic excellence. Indie games, again, because of the budget, don't really have access to a ton of animation or graphic design elements that they can use um, on the level of something like a Last of Us or a God of War. Um, Now that being said, a lot of times you'll see there's advantages to being in to creating indie games on the distribution side, and this wasn't really the case 15, 20 years ago, when physical media was necessary um, for gameplay. You had to have a disc or a cartridge to be able to play the game. So a lot of the triple or a lot of the successful game development also required a lot of very good distribution channels. So AAA games have access to a lot more money, so they're 20 years ago were able to have set up those distribution channels, from manufacturing the physical media to distributing it to a bunch of stores around the world, um, to being able to collect profit from all of those different stores or distributors. But since the rise of digital platforms and digital gaming, this it's made it a lot easier for indie games to do very well. Things like Steam and the Epic Game Store and itch.io. These platforms allow people to self-publish, allow uh, the cost of publishing to be significantly cheaper, um, and has allowed those smaller games to get out to a larger crowd of people. So you have like 15 years ago with much smaller games that kind of fall by the wayside because they were very limited release, or very hard to find because they weren't in every store, or they were only available for a short period of time, things like that. To now, these games are available all the time. If you go onto the Steam most popular lists in whatever period of time that you want to look at, a lot of times you'll see a majority of games on those lists are indie games, because there are a ton of indie games that are being made. There are a ton of um, indie games that are now available because it's a lot easier for smaller teams to put things on uh, on these platforms. And because of that, you've also got a lot of a shift in interest for the market, where you have what was once a lot of focus on the next big AAA title is now a lot more focused interest in a bunch of different games. And these games that do well, these indie games anyway, that do well, create surprisingly large fan bases that, because of the accessibility, the price point, the digital distribution, they're able to have access to a lot more variety in games, as opposed to one or two huge titles that they look for every couple of years. All right, so this is the first of the titles that I want to talk about, Undertale. I have a couple of different ones, different genres, different time periods. I guess maybe not really time period. The thing is the rise of indie gaming is kind of focused on, say, the past 10, 15 years or so. Um, Again, coinciding with the availability of digital distribution platforms. Um, and these are kind of the ones that they speak a lot to me. They're ones that I have played and enjoy immensely, um, and also have kind of influenced my game design process. Um, but there are almost near infinite examples of good indie games for you to pull from. anything from Five Nights at Freddy's, Minecraft when it was first released was an indie title. Um, Poppy's Playground and PUBG. Even there are just a ton of examples, and a lot of them are very recent, but a lot of them um, have kind of had staying power over the past 10 years or so. Undertale. So Undertale is, for those who don't know, Undertale is kind of a very player choice forward role playing game esque adventure, where you go through and you meet a bunch of these very unique characters like Sans here, um, and through the story and through gameplay, you find out a lot about them, and you have to make decisions on whether or not, and depending on what those decisions are, whether or not you have to fight or befriend them. Um, until you get to the end of the story, and there are a lot of branching paths, a lot of branching story options. There's a lot of meat in this game, and one of the things I think that really kind of launched it as a very unique gameplay experience is the pacifist run. So if you're not aware of what the pacifist run is, it's completing the game without fighting a single person. And it's very difficult to do if you don't know anything really about. The game's been out for a while now, so it's very easy to find information on how to do it and what dialogue options and actions you have to take to get through it. But the pacifist runs were very difficult when it first was released, because that was kind of the best ending. Um, Undertale does a really good job of kind of creating that this tension through storytelling and through um, kind of simplistic gameplay, as whether or not you uh, go through a one kind of route or the other. Um, and it doesn't really um, force it doesn't really become repetitive or stale in its presentation. A lot of the combat elements, when you do have to fight characters, are unique to that character. There's a lot of different um, mechanics and things you have to worry about during fights. A lot of times they're very specifically, or they're very kind of like broadly designed around a bullet hell. But there are additional mechanics and things that you have to worry about, and it makes it a very unique experience with every piece of combat that you get into. Um, and then there's the soundtrack, which I think is probably one of the most. I mean, the gameplay itself is unique, but one of the most unique things about Undertale is the fantastic soundtrack and the ability that a single developer was able to put together such a great piece of like musical presentation as well as gameplay. And I think one of the things that really kind of makes this shine is how well the presentation was put together with basically no budget. Um, so that's fantastic. And then it went viral, and people, millions of people started playing the game, and it's done really well. And it's kind of a tentpole for indie gaming now. A lot of games take influence on how Undertale presented itself, the way the way gameplay works, the graphic style, the art style, the storytelling, all sorts of stuff get really taken straight from Undertale. Next up, we're going to talk about one of my top 5 favorite games of all time, Stardew Valley. I don't know if I've talked any about Stardew Valley from um, in this class. I think I may have mentioned it once or twice, but I have played many, many, many hundreds of hours of the Stardew Valley, and absolutely love the game. So I have to restart the recording because it's about to end. But when we come back, I'll jump into Stardew Valley. I'll talk a lot about how I love it. Okay, let's talk about Stardew Valley. Um, I'm in love with this game. Like I just said, I've played way too much of this game. But it's a very different experience from other games in that were available at the time, because of its focus on kind of that like slow slice of life style of the farming simulation and the relationship building, combined with actual access to simplistic but very effective combat mechanics. Um, it really kind of has a lot going for it, and it was really something that was kind of a different pace for me as a as a gamer when I was playing it, because it's not something that's like super in your face action all the time, and it's not something that's like completely passive. It's just kind of like a nice mix of it. Not to mention the story is great. Within the story, the overarching story of Stardew Valley itself is very simple, but the storylines for each of the characters ranges from incredibly um, complex relationships amongst them and amongst the player, and how it interacts in the town, how it shapes the town, and then also um, their own personal struggles. Or everyone has something, some kind of um, problem that they're trying to overcome. It's really good. But it really kind of did a lot in a very small package. This is another game that was developed by a single developer, by Concerned Ape, um, and he's, I believe, is still doing development work on this by himself, even though I think the game's been out for 10 years now. Um, but he did a really good job on kind of really fleshing out the different mechanics. As it says in the first square there, the uh, the farming simulation itself is very deep, where you have seasonal crops and things that react in certain weather conditions, things that need uh, different times to grow, different environments to grow in, as well as uh, managing livestock and other farmable things like honey or fish roe, things like that. There's a lot of choices, a lot of customization which you can do in your farm, which is great. I mentioned the story is fantastic, with all the characters, a lot of characters to meet, and a lot of places to go to learn more about them in the world. And then there's the replayability factor, which is both in the farming aspect, where you can play, develop your farm infinitely, um, but also in that adventure aspect, where you have a lot of exploration and huge 100 level dungeons and um, combat through. While there's nothing that's particularly like super difficult boss fight type combat in the game, the difficulty curve scales pretty well upward as you go deeper into these dungeons and find new dungeons to explore. I think there's 3 or 4 in the actual base game now, plus the modding community, which I think is another thing that really helps indie games, is having a very robust modding community. People who are adding more content to your game, um, that isn't beholden to your involvement. It's great. And it really kind of shows that there are people who are passionate about the work that you've done, to do work themselves, to, you know, modify the game in a way that they want to see something else. And if you look at larger AAA studios with big modding communities such as Bethesda, a lot of times those modding communities are kind of where game developers start, um, is creating mods for Skyrim or Fallout. So, um, but there's a lot of depth and customization in the game. There's a lot of um, poignant hooks in the story, and I don't want to keep talking about it because I will talk a lot. But Stardew is fantastic, and it did very well with um, a single developer, and another one that I think really kind of shines with its soundtrack. So next up is, oh boy, I did choose my favorites. I will say that I did choose my favorites, and Balatro is definitely my favorite game from last year. Um, I think I'm gonna check if I still. I don't know if I want to. Hold on a second. Do I still have it installed? I haven't played in a while, but no, I did finally uninstall Balatro. Okay, cool. I'm not sure if I still had it installed, but I've had it installed since it released, and or I did have it installed since it released, and it was it was hundreds of hours of me playing it, just trying to get the um, trying to get all the unlocks of all the jokers and all of the different custom decks and everything. So for those who don't know, Balatro is a mix of roguelike mechanics, deck building mechanics, and poker. Um, the simple construction of it is you have a 52 card poker deck, and you're tasked with creating poker hands by drawing. I believe it starts at 8 cards at a time, and creating up to 5 card hands with those 8 cards that score in some kind of poker aspect. So a pair will score a certain number of points. A three of a kind will score a certain number. Full house scores a certain number. Each of those hands has a different multiplier. Each of the card faces has a different value of points, and that kind of creates your points total. And you're trying to get above a certain amount over a certain number of hands. You get the roguelike aspects of it by having access to custom effects throughout the game. These Joker cards give you different effects throughout an entire hand. You have different things like the oh gosh, I don't even know. I can't even remember the planet cards thing. You have the planet cards where which will improve the multipliers for different hands. The different tools and things cards that uh, change gameplay throughout the entire run, as well as the tarot cards, which will give you certain powers right away, such as removing cards from your deck, or adding cards to your deck, or changing the suits of the cards. And the idea is that you can modify your 52 card deck with these effects to create kind of more of a streamlined strategy. So if you have cards that really help you with a full house type deck, then you want to kind of create, like, fill your deck with cards that are, say, aces and kings, because they're the highest value cards, in a without having other cards to get in the way of your full house deck. There's a lot of strategy, huge amount of depth, and kind of a lot of very almost near infinite replayability. And then there's the deck building aspect. As I said, you're modifying your deck. The cards themselves can get modifiers on them that make them worth more points or higher multiplier, stuff like that. And it is a roguelite in that you will do a run from beginning to end of an entire run of the game, and until you lose. And if you beat the entire run of the game, then you unlock cool stuff and you can do it again. This game is surprisingly simple, or surprisingly deep for how simple it appears to be. There's no real, like, overarching story. There's no viral, like, secrets to the game. It's just very, very solid gameplay and a very fun package that is accessible to a lot of people because of the kind of the concept is easy. It's poker and simple math. It's 16-bit, 32-bit style, makes it very easy to play on pretty much any computer, and it has an incredible amount of depth in strategy of how you play the game. Again, another indie game that was developed by a single developer, and did a really good job marketing it through streamers, through social media, and really getting the word out through kind of a grassroots movement. And it was, I do believe, the Video Game Awards, it won Indie Game of the Year, and it was nominated for Game of the Year. I'm very sad it didn't win Game of the Year, but it's again my favorite game from last year. And one I think I am going to re-download it and play it some more. I do enjoy this game a lot. And now our last one that I want to talk about is Hades. I'm going to restart the recording real fast so I don't go over time. But Hades is another example of a very powerful or very deep game, uh, kind of developed with a very unique art style with a very small team. So, be right back. All right, so Hades. So Hades, for those who don't know, is a isometric action roguelike, similar in concept to, like, I don't know, Diablo, um, or yeah, I guess combat mechanics is very similar to Diablo, or Path of Exile, things like that. And then your roguelike mechanics are kind of like your standard action type roguelike mechanics. You have weapon upgrades and stat upgrades and different paths and things that you can unlock. And then while you're going through the game, you get upgrades that last for that specific run. Um, and what you try to do throughout the game is run through, finish the run, restart, or get as far as you can, unlock things that will help you from the beginning of the game, restart, build a more kind of solid strategy, and keep going so you till you can finish the game, till you can um, finish the game a number of times and unlock all the stuff. Um, Hades does this in a very um, tight package. So between its art style, which you can see from the screenshots is unique and visually stunning, the subject matter of it being you trying to escape from the underworld, and from Greek mythology as the son of Hades. All of the characters in the game are different figures in Greek mythology or Greek gods. Um, all the way to say to the way that it handles death, because you are in the underworld. um, Death is kind of an inconvenience. It sends you straight back to the beginning of the game, and you have to start over again. But it's not really anything as about um, like resetting the world. So Hades gets to play with death as a story beat, where you have, when every time you die and you come back, and then your father Hades talks to you, tells you, hey, why are you doing this? And you can be like, nah, because I feel like I have, rebellious teen years or whatever. And characters that you meet and befriend throughout the game will have those interactions with you. It's very unique, and it gives a lot of depth to the dialogue and to the story of the game, which is great. um, so even when you fail, you still have a feeling of progression, which is great. And again, it's very solid. There's very few issues with bugs or glitches. Um, it's been iterated upon through updates since it was released. It now has a sequel with Hades 2, which is, I think, I have not been able to play. I have not played that game yet, but I've heard is also incredibly very good. And it gives a very unique spin on Greek mythology, which is cool. Um, but this one was successful. I think Hades was originally picked up by Xbox Game Pass shortly after it released, and through social media and streamer access and things like that, it got noticed by Microsoft, picked up, and then kind of pushed out to the masses very effectively. So it had a very effective marketing strategy, and also got very lucky getting picked up by a huge studio for distribution, which was great. I played it on Game Pass. I think I think I did on its release. But it's just a very, like I said, a very well designed, very polished version of a game of gameplay that has existed before, just done kind of a unique spin. So, all of these games and others like them have very similar things in common that um, kind of add up to a successful indie title. Um, Ones that I've highlighted, these are just a couple of them. We can talk about some more. I think the next slide has um, some more depth into that. But a lot of times these games do something unique, whether it's a completely wholly new innovation to gameplay, or whether it's a twist on a trend, or a twist on an expectation from players, um, or if it's just a refreshing presentation of a genre that already exists, or if it's something like Hades, where it's done not necessarily very uniquely, but very polished. Um, these games also tend to have a lot more of a personal emotional tie to them. A lot of times with indie games, because they are games that are done as passion projects or done with very small, very focused teams, the story and the themes of the game tend to shine a lot better, or a lot more, um, and are a lot more focused on whatever the concept is, and can be um, that can create a lot more resonance, a lot more emotional attachment to the characters and to the stories. And sometimes they're just really good stories. Sometimes it's just an Undertale or a Stardew Valley, or um, some other indie games that are escaping me right now. Tons of fantastic. Sea of Stars is great. Just really good storytelling, because there's not a lot of hands in the pie there. Not a lot of people saying like, "Oh, we should change this," or "Oh, this will probably work. Play better with certain crowds," stuff like that. Which leads into the next point, which is creative freedom. Um, because indie games are more passion projects of smaller teams, smaller budgets, less oversight on what they're doing. Um, Indie developers can do kind of whatever they want, for innovation's sake. So they can take more risks, creatively, whether it's through the art style, the music, or the gameplay. Um, if it fits their vision, if it's something that they like and that they want to see in a game, then they can do it. And if they're successful with it, if it's received well, then it can be translated into something that is more standardized in the industry, for good and bad. Definitely something that can be taken advantage of from larger studios, but also something that can be um, advantageous for these indie creatives. Um, so this, sorry, one second. Let me just. All right, sorry, I'm back. So this kind of leads to our last point, which is indie gaming has left an indelible impact on the games industry. The availability of distribution and dissemination of indie um, titles to more people, to larger audiences, more diverse audiences throughout the world, has really kind of elevated indies into not just passion projects that you know look good on somebody's portfolio and can lead them to a job in a major studio, but can define them as great game designers, um, amongst a crowd of game designers. So people know our from indie games, Scott Cawthon, Toby Fox, uh, other ones that I that Concerned Ape. Um, these are developers that, whether or not they've done more than just the thing that the successful indie game that they made, or they've gone to create tons and tons of additional games, such as Five Nights at Freddy's with Scott Cawthon, or um, newer different franchises and things. Um, game uh, Indie developers are getting a lot more recognition now than they were 20 years ago. Um, and uh, this is allowing the focus in the industry to go from these huge once a year, once every 2 or 3 years, AAA experiences to a far more variety or varied and accessible uh, group of games that can appeal to um, a larger audience overall. Um, gives a lot people a lot more options on what to play, on what they can play, or what they want to play, um, and then also gives a lot more recognition to um, the the developers themselves, because again, indie games tend to be a lot more personal development experiences. So there's something that kind of gives that connection from developer to player more so than a AAA game can, with a couple hundred people on the development team. So that's the last slide that I had, and that's the last thing I want to discuss this week. Um, Next week's discussion is on online gaming, live service games. So we're going to be discussing a lot about MMOs, about mobile gaming, battle passes, things like that. Um, Whether or not people have positive or negative feelings on that, it's important to discuss something that is so ingrained in modern gameplay experiences now. So we're going to talk a bit about that, and then depending on after that, depending on our timelines, because I think I may have messed up a week somewhere in here. I'll have project assignments and everything to start next week for the last of three projects, and then the start of the final project. So I'll have all that stuff out next week for you. Thanks everybody. See you guys next week. Bye.